All right. Well, hey, man. Great to see you as always. So tell me, I mean, Mike, we connected last time, through mutual connections, and then we found out that we have this wonderful shared back experience in advertising, design, and then into tech. And one of the things we didn't really get to talk about last time that I'd love to just start off with is like your journey. Like what
Mhm.
even got you into the University of Georgia, advertising, all that good stuff, and
Yeah.
then your path forward. I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a lot of people who get into advertising take a very circuitous path, right? They don't often say, "Oh, my dad was a creative director, therefore I'm going to follow that same path." I started working for a landscape architect when I was in high school. She was the mom of a friend of mine, and I loved it. I loved being outside. I loved working with my hands. I loved the design aspect of it. And I thought, this is for me. So I actually got into a program at NC State, and got into the School of Environmental Design at UGA, and decided to save my parents some money and stay in state. So I started in landscape design at Georgia. So what I didn't factor in is all the botany classes, uh, and pun intended, they wanted to weed me out in in my freshman year. So I decided that that wasn't the career to follow. So I kind of bounced around to a few, and then luckily, what happened is my older sister had a friend who was working at an agency in Atlanta, and it was called the Ryman Agency. It's got Joey Ryman, who's just he was a legend around here, incredible speaker, just creative guy. But I did an internship in the traffic department,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
traffic, was the predecessor to project management, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you literally carried these like clear portfolios of paper from department to department. But the beauty of it was I literally got to meet everyone in every department running paperwork around.
Oh, that's cool.
And I started hanging out in the creative department and just asking a whole bunch of questions. And there was this guy named Kyle Lewis, and Kyle was a really talented art director, still is. He's been a creative director for a long time. And he took me under his wing. And this is back in the Quark Express days. And
Oh yeah.
I was like, what are you doing? Like, what is your job? I'd never even heard of an art director.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So
That
that's how I kind of discovered, this path.
It's funny how many people that I know, especially now in the professional advertising world, right, that I'm not really in anymore, but was a
Yeah.
part of for so long, that like that's almost their path to discovery. It's like I was doing all this other stuff, and then I ran into these people that seemed like really cool, doing really fun things,
Yep.
and I just wanted to be a part of that world, whatever it was,
Yep.
regardless of antiquated technologies and processes. I have to share, I'm of that wonderful weird generation where, it's like I was born into a pre-internet, but then got the internet as I was growing up.
Hmm.
And then now I'm in the post-internet, whatever you want to call it now. But in the same way, in the advertising industry and just the creative industry early in my life, I was a part of going to school, still learning how to like hand type,
Oh, yeah.
hand typography,
Me
um,
too. Me
the
too.
the full scope, and then like hand layouts, but also Quark, and
Yeah.
then Adobe's takeover,
Yep.
and then I mean now we're getting even beyond that. And it's funny how technology has just shaped it, just in so many ways.
But as an art director, I will say what technology still hasn't solved for is kerning, right?
That's right.
I had this masterful type teacher named Rob Lawton, and after UGA, I went to the Creative Circus in Atlanta. It was a
Cool.
spinoff of the Portfolio Center,
Yeah.
and I was the first group that went all the way through that program. But he made us hand letter with those like drafting mechanical pencils like architects use. You had to put them in a little sharpener, spin it around. But what I distinctly remember is what we hand lettered, we had to go hang across the room and flip it upside down, tape it to the wall, and then stand back and critique it. And Rob not only made you critique your own work, but he made others critique your work. And you had to learn how to deliver, constructive criticism, to your fellow classmates. And that's a great life lesson, is how do you make them better, but not break them?
Okay, that I have to, we have to break on this exact subject, because my, who became our fractional CTO, his name's Rich Robinson. He and I actually went to grade and middle and high school together, and then split paths. And didn't really connect, but he went off into, he went to Parsons, to the one school, and then he went to film school. He went back to Pasadena in California, but since then he went on to build the entire product for the WSL and went into technology, and now he's the head of live sports at Amazon.
Okay.
Right. And he helps us on the side. He's brilliant, but he's also on the creative side. And the one thing, when we kind of first reconnected at the early stages of Everyday, was being art school rats, as we facetiously call ourselves. But the critique was at the center of it. That is so, we're musing about how that's so lost, especially in working environments, because of the lessons it teaches you in both manners, right? It teaches you to, one, self-criticize in a constructive manner. It teaches you how to criticize, be critical of others' works in a supportive manner. And it also teaches you how to take it, how to sit there and work within a group and say, oh yeah, my idea isn't perfect and we don't need to dance around it if people are playing that mutual role. And we're actually, funny enough, is like part of our growth structure on the management and the ops side is bringing back the critique. And we want to bring that back, of not as something like, hey, everybody's subject to criticism. It's more like, hey, everybody's subject to the group's view on what is our common purpose and how do we like review our work as a group without being derogatory, but at the same time of being realistic.
One of my favorite, I guess you'd call it a business book, it's kind of a blend of creativity and business, is the book Creativity Incorporated by Ed Catmull. And he was talking about the process of Pixar and the evolution of those stories, and they get written and torn apart and rewritten and torn apart. And if you're one of their creative team members or a director, you have to buy into that system. And when they would look at the finished product from where it started with, it was just light years, away. But so many people that are in the creative space, they're so precious with their ideas, right? Like, I have to maintain ownership of this. It was my idea. I need to make sure everyone knows it's my idea. I need to fiercely protect it. Make sure that anyone else who betters it still acknowledges it's my idea, right? And that's such a limiting mindset of taking the core of an idea and seeing where it can go by bringing perspectives in.
It's so right. So funny enough, just always tying it back, Sean, our brilliant head of product, and I were talking late last week. We were talking about go-to-market and just continuously refining our go-to-market and product market fit. And he was asking me a question, right? And I'm one of those cursed and blessed people that I've been so close to the problem and the solution since the very get-go that in my head it makes sense. And how do I express it? And you just come up against that. But then in our discussion, I kind of phrased it like this, and it goes back to actually a study that I'm sure I'm going to screw up here, but ESPN had done this survey of ESPN readers, of male ESPN readers, to be specific. And they asked, one of the questions that they asked was basically how many people thought they could have been professional athletes. And it was something like 50%, some absurd metric, right?
I think I've heard of this study.
Yeah. And it was like 50% of men, said that barring a injury or bad coach, they would have gone pro in their sport. And it was funny. Like, you just laugh. If you've ever been around a professional athlete of any kind, they're so far better than you or the best D1 athletes. You would laugh, right? But the second part was, I think, how that ties into people's kind of selfishness with their ideas and what they make up in their head. And as creatives, to your point about like safeguarding ideas and being unwilling to risk them and put them forward, or just wanting ownership, I took that to heart. And when I was talking to Sean, I was like, hey, ideas, because every day is built around ideas, right? That's really what we say, is like, we want to help. It's an idea OS. We want people to be able to get the technology out of the way of ideas. And if you take that same survey, I guarantee you, like, I would put, bet the farm on it, which is, if you asked people honestly, how many of them had a big idea that later became a $1 million, $1 billion business? And they would say, oh, I had a similar idea, if only. Or if given the right track, my idea could have been X, Y, and Z.
Right.
The difference between athletics and ideas is you can do it with ideas. You can manifest it. There is a clearer path. With athletics, I mean, for the most part, if you're not blessed with the talent or the athleticism, you're not going to get there. Now, don't get me wrong, hard work pays off for a lot of people. You got to have that Mamba mentality or that Jordan mentality, but to be the best. But athletes are athletes. And for ideas, they can be so simple and effective, and getting people out of the way of their of that like thought that, that they need to hold themselves back, that their ideas aren't great. And then also removing technology out of the way of those ideas is like core to what we're doing. So it's funny, is like the part of that, just circling it back to what you're saying, is definitely at the heart of the critique in art schools, right? Is like, you have this idea, get comfortable sharing it, and also get comfortable having it torn apart. And then thirdly, be comfortable defending it. Support your idea, think through it. It's so valuable.
That's right.
So valuable.
That's right. One of my favorite podcasts is Dak Shepard's, Armchair Experts. I love him. I think he's super funny, super smart, but also, I think he is the embodiment of like what males can be when they are vulnerable, and they can deal with, a lot of our issues. But he had a guest on, and she's written a couple books. I think her name was Amy Edmondson. But she is kind of a contemporary of Adam Grant, organizational psychologist. But she's, she writes about safe space, right? Creating organizations that create safe space. But safe is not like necessarily the definition of meaning you're always nurtured and protected. It's safe meaning there is an expectation of sharing ideas, being wrong, taking risks, discovering that, what you thought was going to be the path forward turns out it's not. But not only is it okay, but it's celebrated that you tried and it didn't work. That's the safety that you need. So many organizations are built where it's at the heart of it is politics or pleasing a certain individual, and ideas are skewed to that person, not for the audience.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. It's not about rounding off all the corners and edges. It's about making sure that there's somebody there to help you back up when you stumble.
Right. It's the old phrase, right? Don't let, perfection get in the way of progress, right? I mean, you gotta go, you gotta make, you gotta build, you gotta learn. And that's when you'll get to the good stuff.
I love that. Did you ever read The Atlantic?
Oh yeah, I do. I'm not a regular subscriber. It's funny. I get a lot of articles sent to me from friends, and it's one of those. I'm like, why don't I regularly subscribe to Atlantic?
I think I have a trouble with any publication that leans into, frankly, into an ideology,
Yeah,
right? Because I think I celebrate critical thinking, right? I celebrate, if you're going to position one side, argue the other,
right.
right? It can be kind of a weird trait for me personally, because I always love to switch sides in arguments just to see, like, and I do it with my own ideas, like try to represent the other side and see if it still works.
Right.
Learned that one thanks to my dad. If he ever listens to this, he'll appreciate that. But the Atlantic has kind of swung both sides, but I think they're doing a really good job lately of representing both sides and getting back to what they started off at, which is very much a long form, thoughtful, research based op-ed publication, right?
Right.
And recently, it was a really, I think I posted it to my LinkedIn. There was a really refreshing read that I've been thinking about recently, and it was about masculinity.
Mhm.
He's speaking of Dax Shepard and what you appreciate about him, and it was all about the idea of, like, sure, there's the concept of toxic masculinity, but then they bring in, or they introduce this concept of heroic masculinity.
Mhm.
And what happens when you kind of group, like falsely group, kind of all, in their sense, all masculinity into the toxic side, and what happens when you need the other side, right, which is the positive nature that we see in this kind of dichotomous
Right.
comparison of what it is to be a boy, to be a man, etc., and what young men kind of come out to think. And it's interesting because I mean, tying it back to your original thought of, like, the critique and the safe space, and even Adam Grant's ideas on organizational philosophy,
Yeah.
is when you think about the role that, quote, that it's, you're supposed to live as a guy, as a man, as whatever,
Yeah.
and then seeing the world kind of split it off and constantly resonate one without being able to object to it, you feel forced into one thing. And
Right.
if organizations do that with ideas, right, if they force you into, hey, you can only think this one thing, and if you go against the grain, then you're not welcome. That's an unsafe workplace,
Right.
right? But
Yeah.
if you build it so it's like, hey, there are moments when we're going to need you to go over the edge. We're going to need you to fail. We're going to need you to take risks. And yeah, you're going to fail, but you're not going to be penalized for it.
Yeah.
Then you create that safe space. And I think this article, if you ever get the chance, I mean, it's actually really well written. You can find it on the Atlantic, and it's called Heroic Masculinity.
Hmm.
And they just talk about, like, hey, I forget the author's name, but she had just some really eloquent points about when we call on masculinity to come back into the picture, and the role that can be playing, and how it's been kind of meandered over the last 30 years. But anyways, it's one of those wonderful things when maybe it's the creative in us, of just you get into these long form reads, and then you immediately pull it to apply to your ideas of today.
Yeah.
But
I think that's one of the common genes of creative people, is just it's a natural curiosity, but it's just a willingness to question things.
yeah,
And for other types of personalities, equally as smart, equally as effective in their area of expertise, they like, to be decisive. They like clarity. Once
yeah,
they've arrived at a solution, they're all in on it. Like, there's no time to stop and second guess things, and but
yeah,
I've certainly worked with personalities that just insatiable curiosity rubs them wrong, because they're like, do we really have to think that deeply about this? And certainly there is, at the extreme, there's overthinking, never
yeah,
getting to a solution because you enjoy the process of thinking
yeah,
too much.
yeah, yeah. I think it's that it's funny is I always shape things. I'm like adamantly anti single solutions. Right. It's like a core philosophy of mine that if anybody tries to sell you, like, one thing that solves things, is
Yeah.
like they're trying to sell you, or they're lying to you,
Right.
And I think of the world as a frame. right? And all the actions and inactions that we do exist in this frame of balance, right? And that's really how you need to direct people and organizations and technology, is to build a frame around the variability, not try to dictate a single line. But regardless, I think, to your point, I think that creatives do manage to bring questioning and critical thinking into organizations, and that's always going to be their value, that type. And linear thinkers, right, more of the, okay, I have an objective, I'm going to get it done, have their same value, because they're, succeed at all costs, get it done. And then it's the balance between those two that makes magic, right? Because I don't know if I ever shared with you, but again, shout out to my dad, weirdly twice in one day. But he he's not a guy that's particularly loquacious, but he's a smart guy. And one of the pieces of advice he gave me as a kid, when I was getting into a little bit of trouble here and there, was respect authority, but always question it. And I've carried that with me to this day. I think I brought it up to him and he didn't even remember telling me, but I've carried it with me to this day, because it's the idea of, listen, whatever is the mean, whatever is the way that is being operated, there's clearly a reason why. But that doesn't mean you need to accept it as an orthodox, right. that you need to follow. Exactly. And things need to change and they need to be challenged, right? That's how you temper glass, right? That's how you temper it. You make it stronger that way, in a way. And I'm curious, I mean, really, aside from the diatribe, I'm curious in your role, because you've gone from, back to it, landscape design into advertising from the art direction standpoint, it sounds like, into managing creativity, which is a whole different herd of cats,
and
right?
Selling it both internally and externally too. Yeah,
which we can spend another entire hour talking about herding of cats and the similarity with engineers. But like creatives and engineers, I think are very similar personality types. But once you graduate beyond that and you start working in technology and applying that to a product from a service, really, how was that transition? Like, what did you find? Were there similarities? Was it total opposite? What was the impetus behind it?
Yeah. I would say the transition to product requires such a commitment to understand your audience a lot better, spend time with them, understand what their pain points are. I think so much of marketing traditionally has been very selfish, right? It's the brand pushing out the message they want heard, not what their audience needs or what they don't design their product or service around. True needs, they design what they believe will be the most profitable, or some other goal. When you're building product, if you don't take the time to really understand the problem you're solving for, a particular audience, I'm not saying that you're destined to fail, but you're definitely on a path to a major pivot coming, And I think that was probably one of the biggest differences. I would have a creative brief we'd work from. We understood market forces, but we still created for the benefit of the brand and our client, not for the benefit of the consumer of that service. So that was a pretty massive shift. And then just learning to be efficient. Honestly, I was very lucky to have worked for some big agencies with, insanely large budgets. I shot a couple Super Bowl spots. And when I think back to what those budgets were to create a 30-second spot, there are independent films that are not getting that budget.
That's right.
It's crazy what we spent and the time it took to create those ideas. No, don't get me wrong. I love the crafting, shaping of ideas, the exploration, but I think there's a middle ground that's probably healthier. And I think the pendulum probably swung too far the other way right now, where we're overly programmatic about everything. And we beat people into submission with, using data to disrupt their lives at a point where they didn't invite us into the conversation. We're just constantly outside the window being like, hey, it's me again.
Yeah. It's kind of lost its elegance in that way. One of the things I always loved about, I should say one of the things I always loved about getting to work with some of the just world-class creative minds that I was able to talk to and work with and experience. And I think like any other industry, you have people that are just so good and so thoughtful and so great at the execution and the connection of the dots and the balance of what we want versus what they need kind of thing, that when you have them and you experience them, it's truly a pleasure. And what I always found with people like that, and these were, this is late 90s, early 2000s, plus I would say mid 90s of just learning about it then. But really when I came into it was like early internships in the late 90s and then early 2000s was like living in Portland. It was the Wieden, Kennedy and Nike teams that were producing some of the great ads. Right. And actually I'm having a conversation with one of our advisors, Nancy Montserrat, right after this for our biweekly. She was the head of North America and kids and women's advertising at Nike during that time.
Yeah.
So she's actually personally responsible for some of it. She'll never take credit for it though. But
it's never about product.
Yeah, exactly. So they it goes back to, Steve Jobs had a early keynote bringing up Nike. And they're like, this is a commoditized product good, but they never talk about the product. They talk about an athlete and what it means to be an athlete. Right. And then Apple obviously did their Think Different campaign and all that. But anyways, this was a time like the 90s and the early 2000s to me was this golden era of elegant brand advertising, right? Where you connected to an ideal with people and their products. And then we got into this programmatic thing where it's a little bit more brute force. It's like, how many ads can we get? How many clicks can we get as soon as possible? Doesn't matter what it looks like.
Right.
Change the button, change the color, change the slogan. We don't care what we say, so as long as you come in.
That's right.
And there has to be a long tail like of people, like we're not all like we've proved out one thing. And Milton Friedman wasn't totally correct. We're not rational beings and we don't behave rationally.
Right.
What do you think?
Well, I am all for programmatic tools. I'm all for, sophisticated, MarTech, tools to use, lead gen, nurturing, all this. But when it's broken down into a process that just dehumanizes it, and it's like, hey, our data tells us that when we hit a person 21 times, that they convert. I'm always thinking, or what if they could convert 5 times with really good, respectful content that spoke to them, right? I can't prove that 5 versus 21, but like, why not do some experimentation and see if we really do need to beat them into submission? And is that really the healthiest relationship? It's like, fine. I'll try your product. Just leave me alone. Like, can you imagine dating that way? It's like, okay, fine. I'll go on a date with you. I swear to God, just leave me alone and I'll go on one date with you. Like, what is the likelihood of that turning into some kind of long-standing relationship?
I think I had a buddy who dated like that. And he always said the most no's get the most yeses. And I was like, I was like, how advanced and I guess technological of you, but that's I don't know. I'm glad I went the other way. But no, it is a really good point. Is that again, there's a balance, right? There's a purpose behind the technological, I guess just the transference of our messages through digital applications, be able to refine that. There's obviously there's an objective value to that can't be it can't be underestimated. But at the same time, I go back to the problems that, as a founder, right? That I think I've been talking to other founders, and I always do, and and to other marketers and go-to-market strategies. And obviously we tackle it on our own. And I'd love to hear about from your startup. But what we found was that, especially when you get people that are at large organizations coming to startups, is they often confuse, like you said, the budget value trade-off and the appropriate mechanisms at the appropriate time. So it's like, okay, great. You worked with a huge agency with a huge brand for a Super Bowl spot.
Yeah.
I mean, you got tens of millions of dollars for that, right?
Right.
And then you come down to a startup that needs to get 0 to 1, and you've got $5,000 to get 10,000 people, and they can't be views; they got to be conversions.
Right. It forces creativity, to not use traditional means because it's too expensive. It does also limit experimentation somewhat because you literally have a fixed amount of money. So, you've got to test, but test inexpensively and test quickly and figure out what's working.
Well, that's exactly it. We were going through this again. One of my brilliant co-founders, Hallie, who's our marketing guru. She's on maternity leave, raising little baby Dale. So we can't wait till she gets back. But regardless, one of the early things is she's been running growth marketing for tech companies, right? Yeah. And so switching over into small business mode, which is effectively what a startup is. I always laugh at, oh, we have a startup. It was like, so you have a micro business, or I don't know, what are you? But but we went over it and we were like, what's the first order of marketing? Because we can't out advertise our competitors. We can't out market or spend them. But what we can do is do the stuff that they're seemingly totally uncaring of, which is connecting with customers at a ground level. Yep. Right. It's like we were going over our messaging, and it's like, and I've done this for the brands, but like, what's stopping us from just going door to door and making real connections with people effectively, right? Or like throwing a party, like not that parties are the solution, but my point is doing something very visceral.
Well, I would argue that the irony here is that the number one, most effective marketing device from 50 years ago still holds true today, and that is word of mouth.
Oh yeah.
Because we're just bombarded with content that we just can't absorb, the way we once did when there was a limited number of channels. You just have to focus on creating the best experience, the best product, and then you are rewarded because people have the ability to now share, whether it's a great review, whether it's telling a neighbor, whether it's going to a party. And, I can't tell you how many times I've met with a either new client or prospect, and you do a little digging around, and you discover there's a lot of flaws with this product or service that you've created. I mean, go read your own reviews. They're not good. Like, the solution out of this is not dumping more marketing into it. The solution is fix the experience and then come back and let's talk about marketing. I tell you a story that illustrates that for me in my career. Years ago, I was working on a consumer cleaning product. I won't tell you which one it is, but it was a smaller one, kind of niche, but incredibly effective, well engineered, like, really great cleaner. But the client was like, we keep running this problem that we just can't get repeat buyers, even though we know that this is a really good product. And so we started digging in, talking to them. We went out their facility, met with their chemical engineers. They did demonstrations for us. Like we're going to prove to you guys how great this stuff is. So we started marketing, and sure enough, we saw a little bit of a lift, but then it wasn't sustained. They could not sell twice to anybody. And the easy answer is, well, it's got to be the marketing. Can't be the product, right? It's got to be the marketing. So we were out at a warehouse, and I was talking to one of the clients, and we were walking around, and I saw a forklift, and it was bringing a pallet of this cleaner, and it was stacking them up. And again, goes back to just the curiosity, right? I was like, wow, that is a big stack, of plastic bottles. I'm like, how many of those can you actually stack that can withstand the weight? And they were
Uh-huh.
like, huh, I don't know. I'm like, what do you mean you don't know? Like, what is a safe amount of weight you can stack? And they're like, I'm not sure. Let me go ask whatever, the warehouse manager or whatever. So long story short, fast forward, what was happening is they were stacking too many of these things, and it was cracking the containers, the spray bottle, and the vacuum did not work longer. So when you squeeze a trigger, it has to have a vacuum, right? So if it has, any kind of crack,
Yeah.
the packaging, it won't work. So what happened was people were trying it for the first time and it was working, when they unscrewed it and dumped it out, and they were like, oh my God, like I can't get the trigger to work. And that was the problem. Right. And so they fixed that. And and it wasn't like overnight, but started
yeah.
trending back up. People like the product, the delivery vehicle
Yeah.
actually work now.
Dude, I've had that same problem where I think it was during COVID. I was mixing my own little cleaning solution, and I got some spray bottles, and they would break.
Yeah.
And it was like I don't care how good this is. I'm just going to go get the reliable one.
Yeah.
Because it won't break on me. But it's funny. It brings up that idea of convenience that we've been talking about lately, and we've been talking about it on our side of like specifically the UI. Right.
Yeah.
And we have some talented guys helping us with the design. I should say talented people helping us with the design. And it looks great, but a decision was made the other day that, changed a little tweak, but it changed this thing where it made the interaction less convenient.
Mm-hmm.
And it was funny because it was the right technological decision, right? But it was the wrong product decision.
Yeah.
And that's mainly because it was like, hey, this is going to save a lot of stuff in the future, and this is going to be great. And it was all internal. It was all people saying, this is going to be great for us.
Yeah.
It'll make our lives easier. But then if you looked at it from the user standpoint, it's like, yeah, but the first action that they want to do now becomes less convenient.
Yeah.
And you're putting things in between them and the solution that they're trying to get. And it's like, whether that's more convenient for us doesn't matter.
Right.
What matters is can they go in and immediately do the first thing that they would do, which is spray the bottle, right? It's like, it doesn't matter how good the cleaning fluid is if you can't get the cleaning fluid on the dirty spot.
That's right. That's right. It's a friction point. I'm also amazed at how many companies who do have the budgets and means don't use heat mapping tools, Hotjar and Full Story and these other ones where, go look at how your customers or prospects are interacting with your product or your site, your marketing, and you will uncover those friction points. Like, why do they keep going over here, back and forth? Oh, wait, it takes 2 clicks to navigate to this thing. Like, I never noticed that before. Why did we build it that way? And again, this is passive listening, but it's still listening, right? What are your customer needs?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's funny. I have every time somebody brings up Hotjar, I make them look at my keyboard. Because I have my Shift, Option, Command, L, and M keys. Oh, and A key are wearing out on my MacBook, so they're like see-through.
Yeah,
I mean, like they're glowing through because I'm a hotkey person. And
I'm looking at mine and which one. Yeah, I've got a couple missing ones as well. That's so funny.
Yeah, and you can tell, right? Like from a keyboard standpoint, we could deconstruct QWERTY to the end of end. Yeah. And you can see a heat map on your keyboard, but what you can also see is for me, right? And my personal input, obviously Sean is our head of product, but we're small. We all contribute. Is now that he's taken over and is directing this, my little inputs are really about like, hey, remember, I'm like at the end of the day, I'm the end user.
Yeah.
right? We started this product because I was running my business. I was doing these things. I was observing my clients and customers and people doing these things. And we wanted a solution that fixed our problem.
Right.
Right. And being able to, again, as creatives, pat on our back here, is being able to be self-critical and say, oh, sure, this looks good, but what actually is helpful?
Right.
And if I look at my keyboard, that is a physical manifestation of what behaviors I do on the computers, right? And it's not what everybody does, but what it is I want shortcuts.
Yeah.
I don't want to drag my mouse to 6 different places to do something. I want the command shift, command option, whatever, produce
Yeah.
3 variations of the same thing.
You know, I always go down weird tangents, you know,
Love
like
it.
this, but I wonder if the laptop, you know, engineering teams have, like, from repair data and stuff, I wonder which key is hit the most out of anger. And I would guess it's probably return, right? You're trying to submit something, return. I bet you that they have data to tell them, hey, we've got to reinforce the return key, you know, first, and second. Like, yeah, I wonder if, like, you see what I'm saying? It's like,
yeah,
the number 8 doesn't need the same design aesthetics as the return key, because people get pissed and smack
yeah.
the
You need to reinforce it. I bet you do. So funny enough, Rich and I went through this exercise that we very fancifully called rank ordering, right, of actions. But we went through and we just were trying to break down of, like, what are the priority actions that we all do in our productivity tools, right? What is a document? What is a chat? What is a task manager? What is a whiteboard, and so on? And then down to the very visceral level, like, what buttons do you hit the most?
Yeah.
And what is antiquated? What are holdovers, right? And this is such a nerdy geek out on tools thing, but I had this moment that was very big for me, probably very little for everybody else, where I was like, why does Command P and Command S at this point have so much real estate priority when I use them the least? Now, right? And let's go into control and caps lock.
Yeah.
Right? Is like, okay, what is the function of having as big as return that is caps lock? How many of us are screaming at each other in Twitter or wherever that caps lock is necessary? And second, what are all these buttons? And then if you do a little digging, a little research, these are holdovers from typewriters and early computers, where control was literally a way to communicate with the control system.
Right.
And these were ways that were, like, hard coded in. So our early challenge, just to kind of tie this one up, was, can we, and we will eventually introduce it, but can we introduce functional novelties that are beneficial to the user, that rethink these very, it's first principles of design. Just because it is, does it have to be? And caps lock, control, the rank ordering of command to shift command, etc. Those are real.
You know, I heard a great story recently about Roku, and I don't know if you have a Roku streaming device, but, you know, when they designed their remotes, they said, hey, we are going to be the anti-remote, right? Like, all these unnecessary buttons, you know, we want to get rid of it and make it so simple to use. And one of the buttons that they don't have on there, and even though I own one of these, like in my basement TV, I didn't even think about it until I heard this. There's no power button on a Roku remote. They removed it. And what they did is they realized that it's easier just to leave the device will go into a passive mode on its own. There's no need to even have a power button on their device. And I was like, I mean, can you imagine designing? I mean, you talk about, you know, what is extraneous, what do you not need, what can we strip away? Your first guess probably wouldn't have been the power button, right?
That's right.
And they did.
That's right. I mean, that's the iPhone BlackBerry thing, right?
Yeah.
By the way, if you want a fabulous movie to watch that's under the radar, watch the recent BlackBerry movie. I think it's just called BlackBerry. Great actors.
Okay.
And and it's a really like it's a what do you call it, a narrative nonfiction.
Yep.
Right. So but it is really well done and under the radar, but there's a great moment that it highlights, right, where these guys truly innovated the smartphone. They
Oh yeah.
did. Right. If you think about it, the BlackBerry was actually the first smartphone.
Oh, I remember. I had a BlackBerry Pearl, man. I remember.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it really email phone, like it was great, but they did it. I mean, what's amazing that the movie highlighted for me, I didn't know this before it, but then looked into it, was that they were the ones that not just the phone, but they were the ones that actually hacked the cell service for the cell companies, and they re-engineered the capacity of the cell towers and etc.
Wow.
And then re-engineered their platform. So they were, I mean, very technologically brilliant people, and they did this, and they had the keys, right? And it was always, hey, that haptic connection has to be there. You have to have the tactile keyboard because it just is. And then they show the moment, right, when the iPhone comes out and they're like, touch screen, one button. If you remember the original iPhone, and you were like, one button.
Right. No, wait, no. How does that work?
Oh, I was such a Luddite in this. I was sitting there like, you can't get rid of the keyboard.
Right.
That's how this is. Touch screen's going to be dumb. And now I'm touching my laptop, just like, where's the touch screen? But these are the fundamental, I think, like first principle discussions, though, when it comes to, I mean, taking it back to what you said, I wrote it down here. You said where so many people talk about what I want people to hear versus what they actually need to have fixed.
Yeah.
Right. Like, what's the solution? And we think about these, we have these fundamental assumptions, right? Heuristics, whatever you want to call them, of like, oh, it is because it has been.
Right.
Great. Caps lock, whatever you want to say, the keyboard on the phone.
Right.
And then you just have to at some point say, well, because it is, does that mean it needs to be? Or is that just something that we're so used to?
Right.
That, that we just take it for granted.
When I was at Codesmith and we were building, custom software, web and mobile apps, we would have prospects come in, new clients sign, and the first thing we would say is, have you done any customer research? And 90% would say no. Right. Then it would be like, well, our recommendation is you got to talk to your prospective user. You have to. If you don't do this, it will cost you so much money. And we're not saying your product or service can't be effective, in the long run, but it's going to cost you so much money to learn in market, to learn in real time. And you may not be able to win people back. Go talk to people first. And I would tell you that probably 10% of our clients did that.
Yeah.
And we had research partners, and those that did, 100% of the ones that did came out of it going, thank God that we did that.
Yeah.
Because there's no one that doesn't pivot to some degree, right? Yeah. Some of them go, I'm abandoning this completely, and you just saved me, millions of dollars. Thank you. And some of them go, you know what? I confirmed a lot of what I thought. However, there was learning, and I need to pivot a couple little things. Like, awesome. Now you know.
It's the most indispensable thing. I read this book this weekend called guy who was on my first version of this working session, Hui Pham, who you should listen to him. He's a brilliant guy. He's a creative marketer, startup guy. If you've never done it, and he's a brilliant dude. One of my good buddies. But he forwarded me this book, which I'm looking up right now. I'm forgetting the name of it. It's kind of a quippy book, It's not the hard science anything, right? It's called The User Method by Jeff Schwarting. It's a small book, and they just take all these lessons from classic San Francisco, Silicon Valley startup and more, right, down to old brands and the like. And they just talk about, like, listen, you're solving a solution. The main point of it is that founders that set out to design a product that helps them solve something that they personally need are more likely to be successful. And that's because they're their own user. right?
Right.
And then out of that, because they've solved a real need rather than examined a business case, they solve something more. Now, if you're coming at it from a business perspective, like a consulting or an agency or something, or even just a business unit, hey, we need to innovate, then you have to talk to users. You have to talk to the customer. There's no replacement, because you can't theorize on a spreadsheet what's going to work and what's going to not. You need to look at it. And so for us, right, we're going through this right now. Is I'm just trying to tell that story very simply of what we're doing, right? And at the core of Everyday is this unified architecture.
Yeah.
It's that you can create text, create text or a modal in a document in one app, and then that object, that modal, can exist simultaneously in a whiteboard, and you can manipulate it from both, and they have the same shared content, the metadata, right? And that's novel. That's great. And as AI proliferates, it's going to be a game changer, because you can right now automate creation. Hey, make me a slide deck, this, that, and the other.
Right.
But as soon as that's made, if one thing changes in the document, you're going to have to remake everything, and you can't keep the same text, right? So anyway, so we have this great thing, but that started because, man, the very basics, I went back to it and I was like, hey, you know what I really don't like in the middle of the day when I was managing myself and then my team and then my client team, was if I changed something in this one document, that I had to then get my team to change it across 18 other documents and 18 different applications.
Yep.
And then it would clear, the game of telephone would always happen.
Right.
Right. And then you add in first and third party layers of like, okay, there's my team, then the sub team, and then there's the client team. It resulted in so many inefficiencies, so much poor time, just because of copy and paste and siloing of information.
Yep.
And I wanted to change that. And so that's why that's like the beginning of Everyday, right? Now, you're a design thinker, right? You did the design thinking program. Last time we talked, you were talking about, that community, and their design thinking, like from one of just being this wonderful way of getting linear people to start abstracting their ideas, also, I think, brought methodology to creativity for the first time, which was wonderful. And I reflect on to the who was it, the jobs to be done theory.
Yeah.
Who was that developed that?
I don't remember.
It wasn't Christensen. Maybe it was Clay Christensen.
Okay.
But it was either Christensen, but it came out of the behavioral economics, like the Kahneman and Tversky guys. But regardless, they had that idea of identify the progress that people are trying to achieve, right? And then get basically everything out of the way.
Right.
And as a design thinker, right, I'm curious to your perspective, because I think it goes back to that old marketing adage of people don't buy a drill, they buy a 1/4-inch hole.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, as a design thinking person who implements that, like, especially with like a small product, like a first product, okay, Everyday, right? Initial stages, go to market, launching, we're solving our own needs. However, when you're talking to more and more users, how do you balance in that smaller place, in that smaller business, how to understand customers and build and take the risks?
Yeah, I think the answer is patterns, right? You may have something incredibly insightful said by a prospect or a user, but it's said once and there's incredible value, but it's hard to buy into it if it's counter to what you believe in. If you start to spot patterns, you go, this has come up now multiple times. Maybe not said the exact same way, but it feels like there's something here. I think that's the first indicator. There's almost like little fingerprints, you know what I mean, in the same place. And then you start to go, I think there's some validity here to this feedback, because it's coming over and over again. Let's pause and see if we can figure that out. The other thing that I like about design thinking, this kind of is coming full circle back to what we were talking about at the beginning of creating safe spaces to explore, is being willing to take yourself out of your comfort zone, and also accept the fact that there's no preordained person to come up with a solution. It can come from anywhere, right? It can be the receptionist who just happens to be,
Yeah.
setting lunch down and they overhear something and says something profound, right?
Yeah.
Great ideas or spark can come from anywhere. And a lot of organizations don't work that way. There is a hierarchy and the solution always comes from up here and then trickles down.
Yeah.
Right.
I love that.
Um,
I couldn't agree more. It's like great ideas truly come from anywhere.
Anywhere. And when I was an early or young creative, I didn't realize this at the time. I only had this self-awareness later, but I was one of the few creatives that actually enjoyed going to focus groups because most creatives took it as a criticism of, well, clearly you think that a consumer who doesn't do what I do is smarter than me and is going to tell you what you should do when I'm sitting here telling you, what to do. I think probably just led by curiosity. I like sitting behind the two-way glass and listening, and it wasn't the obvious answers that were interesting. It was reading between the lines. It was something said that no one wrote down. I was like, wait a minute, that's interesting. Or back to my point about some variation of that is like a pattern that you're seeing. And then you have the moderator take a break and come in and go, hey guys, how's it going back here? Anything you want me to dig into? Yeah. This person said that, can you ask some questions around that? And they do it, second half of the group they ask, and suddenly you go, oh my God, we've uncovered something, a pain point, a hack that they use to do something. And suddenly you can build, the best marketing ideas around that little nugget. But because the creatives were so precious and they were back at the agency and they didn't want to listen, to the stupid, consumer, what do they know? Well, they'll tell you what you want,
One, focus groups are the funniest thing, but you're so right. Like I would love them too. I have to tell you this story real quick about a focus group I went to one time. It was just hilarious on all levels. But before that, I would always kind of irritate some of my clients because I'm a creative guy with a science and business background as well. And so, and finance. So I can run the numbers and do regression analyses, and I understand a spreadsheet. Yeah. And so they would always laugh because I was always very good with data. And I was always good at very, very much reading the numbers and processing them, as well as kind of calling the BS. Yeah. And I had one client in particular she was brilliant. She was just one of those like ultra smart kind of JD MBA types, and had been working in Big Chocolate forever. I call it, I won't name the brand, but in Big Chocolate. Yeah. And and we went to we had landed this big client at my last firm, and we were doing a partnership with another one. And we were in LA. We flew into LAX. I don't know if you ever went to focus groups at LAX, but there's like a focus group hotel next to LAX. Yep. So there's like an In-N-Out Burger, this focus group meeting area, and the hotel.
And focus group facilities are the most depressing places in the world. It's like a Russian prison.
It was crazy. So it was so funny, man. We had landed this client, and we were like, they'd actually, I don't know if they really liked me personally, because they gave us this small project that I thought was kind of a test of like, wait for them to screw it up and advertise this product, and it's a test, and then we'll be able to replace them. And then we just knocked it out of the park, and we launched this new product, and we like sold out of the product in a week, and it was like 3 months supply, and they had to like halt sales. It was so successful. It was great because I was a little bit like, haha, whatever. But the point being is, like, then they were like, okay, let's go to LAX. Let's test this whole new rebrand, relaunch of all the product line. And, across the country, flew into LAX. And we get there, and I think I'd gotten there a day late because of other projects. And we walk in, and I'm seeing this, the head of the team just calling shots. Here's what they're going to say about this product. Here's what they're going to say about that product. Here's this, because they were Big Chocolate. Yeah. And then I walked in, and I remember just sitting with them and I was like, yeah, but that's not why they buy it. And this was probably the impetus of why they didn't like me. I was like, you're absolutely right. You know, every answer that they're going to give, and it's going to reinforce your decision to make the logo bigger.
Yeah.
I was like, but that's not why they buy your product. And they're like, what do you mean? And this was just assumption, but it was also knowing the product ahead of time. And it was just like, listen, my little intuition here is that they're buying the product for some other reason other than how sweet it is.
Yeah.
And anyways, we proved it out and it was great. But the funnier story, aside from me, conquering this one situation and irritating my bosses, which is not a good idea, is we all stayed at that hotel and we went and got drinks and we were bonding with the client and just, whatever. And we noticed this just plethora of really good looking women that came into this hotel bar near LAX in just groups. We're like, is there a club? Like, they're all done up. And we were sitting there drinking. And then one of them came over and like talked to one of the clients. And then my counterpart at the time, who had the head of the other partner agency, was like, oh, these are working women. Okay, they're here for the crowd. And it's like the hotel business focus group crowd that they had just cordoned off. And so every, few nights we talked to the bartender, this just group of working women would come in and just go through the service. And we just sat there, just like watching the best show. It was the greatest show of human behavior when you're like, okay, here's the focus group and we're looking at it. But then we actually watch real human behavior of like,
you talk about some sales lessons, right?
Dude, it was the ultimate sales lessons. Cause I think I don't know from your standpoint. I know we got a couple minutes left, but from your standpoint, like realistically, breaking it down, aside from product and formality stuff, I was musing the other day about, how we sell our product, how we get it, because we truly are, I believe, solving a very real problem that exists, right? That's being ignored because people want a point solution and the metrics point in one way, but there's a real behavior that we're solving. But then I get back to it and I think about the old grand lessons that you and I experienced early on in advertising, right? And I go back to, so funny enough, Nancy, our advisor, who I'm going to talk to later today, she's in the movie What Women Want. You ever saw that? You know the Mel Gibson ad movie with Helen Hunt is the and he's like the quintessential 1980s sex sells beer commercial guy.
Yep.
And then he gets into the mind of the user. What do they want? How do you communicate? That was the whole lesson of the film.
Yeah.
Is listen rather than try to dictate.
Right.
And so Nancy actually plays one of the Nike executives or the advertising executives. So she's in it with like a wig on at the end.
That's so funny.
It's so funny. Yeah. I still remember the tagline. I loved the movie just for that, which was no games, just sports. And it was for Nike women's running. I thought it was great. And it was actually developed by the Wyden team. But it got me to thinking of like, we see what happened with the Bud Light catastrophe. Yeah. We see what's happening with the commoditization more and more of tools and products, et cetera, et cetera. And Liquid Death, right? I've told you before, is one of my favorite new brands because they just took a risk and it's working for them. And part of me just goes back to how much of that's just fundamentally true of, what? Solutions work, sex sells.
Right.
And there's all of these grand lessons that if we look back on it, we can see why people are attracted to products.
But when I used to teach creative concepting, I taught at Miami Ad School in Minneapolis and the Creative Circus too. I would tell my students, I said, think about a campaign that has either is current and relevant and well liked or broadly liked. And you can pretty much reverse engineer out the strategy from it. And I'll give you an example. Old Spice body wash, right? They did research. And here's what the research showed. You know who's buying men's body wash? Is it men? No, it's women. So women are buying men's body wash because they want their man to smell like that product, right? Do you remember the incredible campaign they did? You know, the man your man could smell like, right?
Yeah.
That was all based on the fact that women buy this. They have this fantasy about, you know, who their man could be if he just did these things, hygiene, dress, like this stuff. And it was, you know, on paper, is it a brilliant, you know, insight? Maybe not at first glance, but you're talking to the wrong person. If you're making a men's body wash and you're selling it to men who are like, I don't care, I'll use whatever soap's on sale at Target.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, no, I need your girlfriend to buy the Old Spice for you. And that was the genesis of the entire campaign, that one insight. The man your man could smell like.
I love it. And it's funny, on a soap level, I always get frustrated at men's body wash stuff. It's like, I don't want to smell like whiskey and alderwood. It's like, I kind of want to smell like coconut. I like the smell of coconut, you know?
I was in Target 2 days ago with my 12-year-old son, and there was a specific deodorant he wanted. I'd never even heard of it. And we were on the deodorant aisle and couldn't find it. So we went over to another area looking for another product, and he's like, oh my God, there it is. There's these like the special brands, right? And there it was. So two things about it. Number one, it smelled like bourbon. Right? I was like, yeah, no on that one. No, my 12-year-old son is not going to smell like bourbon. And who wants the deodorant to smell like you're a drunk, right? Actually, three things. So that was the first. Second observation, incredible packaging. It was some variation of a Sasquatch character that's hilarious.
Okay.
Like Squatchy or some brand, whatever.
Yeah.
And then third, it's half the size of everything else. And it was $11. $11 for this small container of bespoke deodorant or whatever that smelled like bourbon, and my 12-year-old wanted it. And I was like, man, that is a lesson in branding right there, right? And I was like, a million years am I buying that for you?
That's it. Truly, though, truly, it is. I mean, that is a really great lesson in branding, especially for kids. So funny enough, this gets back to marketing to kids, and what you were talking about the program with Old Spice and who actually purchases things. You know, early on in our early stages with Everyday, the first products, like we had really set out to solve two problems, right? One of them was the copy and paste stuff.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly what I already explained, right? It's just a needless thing that before our architecture couldn't be solved because you had disparate things.
Yeah.
So we're, you know, standing on the shoulders of giants in that way. Yeah. Now, the second one of the original formations was, I'm good at research. And I would pull together these presentations, and people buy numbers more than they buy, you know, other things. They're like, okay, here's a good number.
Yeah.
And I would watch, I would say safely, 95% of every statistic or bit of research that I saw from agencies and brands, not that the metrics were made up, but that the idea would form before the metrics were brought in.
Yeah.
And the metrics would be brought in to support the idea.
Right.
Right. Which fundamentally is a broken process, right? If you know research, right? And I sat there and I was like, listen, there is a big boogeyman in the room that nobody wants to talk about. And that's that people are reverse engineering the research to shape and sell their idea.
Oh, yeah.
So our first thing was, what if we go the opposite way and we know that people are going to write down and design out ideas and then do the research? Can we design the deep learning, computer vision, and LLM, machine learning, deep learning models that could actually just read your idea, both visually and written, and then find the research to support it? Or produce research on, like, hey, here's what, like, you like a color palette, you like purple and orange because you're a Knicks fan or something, right? Is like, actually go through and identify those colors in and across social channels and advertising and PR, and then look and reverse engineer the demographics that are utilizing that. So you can at least see who is using what. And we
Wow.
actually still own these. This is part of what's going down the line for every day. We still have these models that we're going to build in.
That's fascinating.
But to the point, we actually executed and we tested this. And one of my buddies from my Pratt days, he was so good, he dropped out. He's now a founding partner of a great agency down in LA called The Many, used to be called Mistress. And their claim to fame was this massive Indy 500 stunt for Matchbox cars, where they did the real loop-de-loops. Yeah, so that was one of their first projects. His name's Blake. He's a world-class design and creative guy. And we were testing out our product, and they brought us in, and we're nice enough, right? We were testing out the deep learning models. And one of them we did was they were doing something for Pokemon and eBay. And they were, there's a whole initiative. It's already out. I'm not ruining anybody's day here, but we tested it by training our vision models on these like high value Pokemon cards and who was training it, because eBay was launching a trading card initiative. And funny enough, the team, like initially, all really smart, all great people doing great stuff, were like, oh yeah, we're going to direct it at kids and this because Pokemon. And one of the things we discovered in our research was that no kids were talking about it.
Yeah.
It was all guys like my age and older. And so we produced what I still very lovingly call the dad scale.
Yeah.
And it was that in this social ecosystem across the channels that we examined, that it was dads from the age of like early 30s to early 50s that were talking about these cards. And the scale was guys that really liked having been to these things, and they wanted to bring their sons and daughters to enjoy it. And then on the other scale, the older ones were people that were trying to look for investments that were like,
but this goes back and just proves that theory that if you don't go and talk to a prospective user, if you went and talked to kids and kids were like, don't care, right? You would have missed completely swung and missed. If you had done that and gone, wait a minute, we may be wrong about this audience. Maybe it's not them. You could have learned anyway just by building it. And if you had enough money to pour into it, eventually you would have got enough data to go, wait a minute, the user looks very different. The people engaging with our content, converting, buying these cards have a completely different profile. But that might have cost you, what, $1.5 million, $2 million of marketing just to discover you're talking to the wrong person. You could have just talked to them in the beginning. Yeah,
no, it's absolutely true. And interesting. So it came up in this conversation when we were presenting it. And one of the people on the other side of the call was like, well, no, but this doesn't make sense because of X, Y, and Z. And then funny enough, my buddy actually raised his hand and he's like, listen, we did this in Matchbox. We found out that we weren't talking to the kids. We were talking to the parents. And then his, reverse engineered, but brilliant way of understanding it was the kids don't have the money to pay for the toys.
Yeah.
Just like the guy's not going out and buying his deodorant sometimes.
Right.
It's his girlfriend, it's his wife, it's whatever. And it's whoever's making the purchasing decision at the end of the day, right, is going to do that. And the kids may say, hey, Dad, take me to see the Sasquatchy bourbon deodorant.
Right.
But Dad at the end of the day is like, you're not going to smell like this, kiddo.
It's purchased by proxy, right? It's not the end user that buys. It's someone, it's an intermediary that is convinced. It's like breakfast cereal, right? Breakfast cereal, characters running in and kids laughing in the morning and whatever. The kid's not using their allowance to buy that box of Fruity Pebbles, right? It's mom.
No, mom wants to buy that enthusiasm in the morning.
Right. Or the kids wear mom down and eventually like, fine, here's the stupid box of cereal.
I mean, it's true. So it's funny is like this is what we're tackling with our dual go-to-market strategy, right? Because we know that, I mean, for our product, it's very much something that an individual can adopt and they're going to adopt for their own reasons. But as you get into enterprises, micro businesses, et cetera, there's a decision maker who has, that has the credit card in their wallet.
That's right.
And for us, it's like, well, there's two strategies, because at an enterprise level, you have to solve problems we're not mature enough to solve, right? But to get in there, we need people to bring us in, so it's not a cold sale. it's a look who's already using sale,
Right.
right? And you know, it's hey Johnny, what snack did you bring home from school today that you're raving about? That's effectively what we want, right? And then make the kids happy. That's the purchasing decision.
Right.
Now on the other side, we have to sell it up. So for us is like that little in between stages. How do we get in with individual users on the bottom end with the kids, right? And have them really bring us in and just solve that problem for them, so that when we go and talk to the purchase by proxy,
Right.
how do we reinforce it there?
Right.
And you know, it's funny, it's a slow, arduous task, but it's
This is why the freemium model works so well, right? Give them a free version to start using, and you know the rank order of pain points, right? You can solve some easy ones, and you know what the next one is, and that's when you start paying for it, right?
Yeah,
I mean, you can lead them right up to that point where you've got them because you solved a couple problems, but you know what the next one's like. Oh, if it can do this, then oh my gosh, it'd be huge if it could do this. Oh, it can. Oh, I got to pay for it. Like,
yeah,
you got them. You got them at that
yeah,
point, you know?
exactly. Well, Mike Martin,
Yeah.
this has been so enjoyable. We are definitely going to do this again, and I'm going to see you in Atlanta, hopefully in a month here,
Good.
in person. I owe you a beer or a Coke or something. But regardless, as always, thank you. I want to keep these going with you. You're an amazing person and super insightful, man.
Oh, I enjoyed it. It's fun. It's fun to bounce ideas around. So I'm glad you're doing this. And, I always learn something in these conversations, so anytime.
All right, Mike. Well, let me know how I can help as well. And thanks again. But I'll talk to you very soon, and I'll send you the link here in a little bit. Okay.
All right. Sounds great, Jake. Thank you, buddy.
All right, Mike. Bye.
All right.